Syria's representative at the UN, the draft resolution on Syria is historic and misleading. And Moscow, the West and some states in the region help the opposition politically and financially, pushing it to be more radical. And heavy losses inflicted upon terrorists in several areas, and terrorists target journalist Karim Shibani in At-Tadamun neighborhood. Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Affairs, the US and the EU sanctions on Syria target the livelihood of the Syrian people. The Saudi military intensifies the crackdown on peaceful protesters. Good afternoon. Syria's permanent representative in the UN, Bashar Jafari, said that the draft resolution on Syria submitted by Saudi Arabia to the UN General Assembly is historic and misleading, violating all international legitimacy principles, primarily the principle of respecting national sovereignty and non-interference in countries' internal affairs.
In a speech before the UN General Assembly, Al-Jafari stressed that the Qatari-Saudi Western draft resolution serves only the interests of Israel. He pointed out to the irony is in that the countries adopting the resolution presented it under Article 34 on the prevention of armed conflicts, while these very same countries have had a considerable part in the militarization of the situation in Syria and pushing it away from the desired political solution by providing weapons to terrorist groups in Syria. Adding that the French Foreign Minister acknowledged 3 days ago that Qatar and Saudi Arabia are delivering weapons to these groups, while some Western media outlets confirmed that the US anti-aircraft Stinger missiles have reached these armed groups via Turkey. Al-Jafari added that some of these countries that adopted the craft, such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Bahrain, cannot be considered as examples of democracy and respecting human rights, as these countries are governed by tyrannical regimes that don't hesitate to suppress their people and murder protesters. Al-Jafari warned against the danger that the UN General Assembly become a cover for spreading legal terrorism and undermining stability and security around the world.
And in a press conference, Dr. Al-Jafari said that the future of Syria is decided by the Syrians themselves, adding that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey and the US cannot determine the future of Syria.
Allow me at the outset to align myself to all those who expressed regrets for the decision of Mr. Kofi Annan to resign from his mission. Actually, the first statement ever that was issued with regard expressing regrets for Mr. Annan's decision emanated from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in Damascus. My government expressed, officially speaking, just a couple hours after the decision was taken by Mr. Kofi Annan, expressed the Syrian government's regrets. And the Syrian government precised that the main reasons for which Mr. Kofi Annan took his decision are mainly related to the non-cooperation by those parties who have influence over the armed groups in Syria, namely speaking Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and some of the co-sponsors of the draft resolution which has been adopted a few minutes ago by the General Assembly. Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey plus France and United States cannot patronize the future of the Syrian people. The future of the Syrian people is and will be decided by the people of Syria themselves. Number two, the political system ruling over Saudi Arabia and Qatar are not, as we all know, an exemplary paragon of democracy and strengthening of human rights. We were expecting the ambassador of Saudi Arabia to come up to the General Assembly with a draft resolution aiming at liberating the remaining Saudi territories occupied by Israel since 1967, mainly speaking the islands of Sanafir and Tiran in the Red Sea. We were expecting the Saudi ambassador to come up to you to declare publicly that the Saudi armed forces will withdraw from Bahrain and will stop their violence against the Saudi people themselves in the eastern area of the kingdom, namely Al-Qatif and Al-Awamiyah. So what happened today is a flagrant and blatant hypocrisy by those who co-sponsored the draft resolutions. Ladies and gentlemen, the legitimate claims, the legitimate popular claims of the Syrian people are now being moved to stage 3 or 4 on the level of priorities of those who pretend they want to help the Syrian people. The foreign interference in our domestic affairs, the smuggling of weapons, including Stinger missiles, has helped only to push these legitimate popular claims of reforming the country at the beginning from priority number 1 to become priority number 5 or 6. This foreign interference has transformed the priorities into an armed rebellion against the government and the state. And I wonder whether the ambassador of Saudi Arabia and the ambassador of Qatar and the European and American ambassadors would allow only 1% of armed rebellion to happen in their own respective countries. Then let them come to me and to my government and start criticizing us. We are not defending any single drop of blood. That is, all this blood is Syrian blood. And we regret, strongly regret, these bloodsheds. But let me elaborate a little bit on this by telling you that, number one, 50% of the losses in a human life are military. Number two, the armed groups invade civilian areas, civilian neighborhoods, and start using these civilians as a human shields. They start even killing some civilians and provocate the reaction from the military. So all these bloodsheds are very well pre-calculated by those who are sponsoring terrorism in Syria, namely speaking, the Qatari and the Saudi and the Turkish intelligence and governments. You have seen today another pitiful example of how the PGA has violated his role when he took side with regard to the draft resolution before voting on it. This is once again a clear-cut example of the repetitive violation by the PGA of his tasks and his mandate entrusted to him by all member states. So today has witnessed again another piece of theater elaborated by the PGA himself, the petrodollars, and the intelligence in order to tarnish the image of my government and show the Syrian government as an irresponsible government killing its own people.
Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, affirmed that voting on a draft resolution on Syria at the UN General Assembly while the UN Security Council is looking into the issue contradicts the UN Charter. Churkin said that the General Assembly's resolution has no significant practical meaning, describing it as yet another step to exercise political pressure against Damascus, adding that resolution is unilateral and is phrased as if the armed opposition does not exist. He pointed out that the resolution articles that are unacceptable, saying things such as the Security Council isn't carrying out its duties, noting that those who supported this resolution are the same countries that are well known for sending weapons to extremist groups in Syria. Wang Min, China's UN Deputy Ambassador, said that the Syrian people have the sole right to determine their country's future and that any political settlement should be reached by the Syrians themselves and be approved by all relevant parties. In a statement, Wang added that imposing any solution by foreign powers would not help resolve the crisis in Syria, confirming that China opposes any military measures against Syria in order to change the Syrian regime, and that imposing any sanctions would only lead to a more complicated situation. Wang went on to say that adopting the resolution by the UN's General Assembly on Syria proved that exercising pressure on one party only would not help find a solution for the Syrian crisis. Rather, it would derail the crisis from the course of political settlement, cause further turmoil, reach other countries in the region, and would jeopardize world peace and stability. An armed terrorist group targeted journalist Karim al-Shibani from the Syrian Arab television while he was accompanying an army unit which was clearing Al-Tadammun neighborhood from terrorists.
A source in the Syrian TV said that al-Shibani was hit in a bullet in his back and his health was stable. Journalist Karim al-Shibani affirmed that the gunman committed terrible acts that cannot be shown on the TV. But the Syrian TV was able to convey the reality through making interviews with the citizens who affirmed that the gunmen were talking strange language and opening fire at random, targeting civilians and law enforcement forces. He concluded that the random fire opened by gunmen proves that they are not Syrians, because the Syrian does not kill his brother under any circumstances.
An armed terrorist group opened fire against the staff of the TV news center, which has been covering the events in Syria in general and in Damascus in particular. My injury was not serious, thank God. This injury constitutes a motivation for us to exert more efforts to convey the truth to the Syrian people and to all of those people who are watching the Syrian channels. These terrorists are targeting the national media staff because they are conveying the truth about the terrorist ideology represented in killing innocent people and terrifying them.
An official source in Aleppo said that reports about the terrorist control over the TV and radio station in Aleppo are baseless and untrue. The source added that the competent authorities clashed Friday with armed terrorist groups at the radio neighborhood, which tried to storm the center, killing and injuring a big number of them, while others escaped. In a relevant context, the authorities clashed with an armed terrorist group in Khan al-Asal to the west of Aleppo, killing and injuring a number of terrorists and confiscating their weapons and ammunition. In Hama, the competent authorities stormed a den for terrorists at the Arba'in neighborhood. An official source in the governorate said that in cooperation with the families and following several investigations, the authorities broke into a den used by terrorists, killing and injuring a number of them, while others surrendered. In Homs and in cooperation with residents and following several investigations, a unit of the Syrian army discovered a tunnel 2 meters high in Deir Balbi orchards area which was used by terrorists. The Independent newspaper published an article under the title "The War of Lies and Hypocrisy" regarding the crisis in Syria by British writer Robert Fisk, who said there wasn't any war which was or has this huge bulk of lies, hypocrisy, or ill manners, as is the case with the crisis in Syria. He added that while Qatar and Saudi Arabia are providing terrorists with funds and weapons, Washington did not direct any word of criticism to the governments of the two states. He went on to say that as the US claims that it wants to spread democracy, its first ally in the region, Qatar, represents a flagrant tyranny, whereas Saudi Arabia is considered one of the most malicious dictatorships in the world. The writer concluded by stressing that as the liberals in Britain rushed to streets protesting the Israeli crimes against Palestinians, the British politicians prevent from directing any word of criticism when Israel commits crimes against humanity in Palestine and Lebanon. Dr. Andrei Dizhinov, the first Russian deputy foreign minister, stressed that Moscow is exerting efforts to help in reaching a solution for the crisis in Syria.
During the meeting held in Moscow between Dr. Qadri Jamil, Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Affairs and Minister of Internal Trade and Consumer Protection, Denisov said that Russia looks to relations with Syria in a futuristic manner, and its stand is very well known, underlining that Russia rejects any intervention in Syria's internal affairs or using force against it. Denisov said that the West and some regional countries did not take any step to exercise pressure on the opposition, pointing out that they did the contrast by instigating opposition and supporting it both on the political and financial levels as well as on the military level, and encouraging it to take more extremist stands. He added that the visit of the high-level Syrian economic delegation to Moscow at this time shows that the Syrian leadership is setting plans to develop the country after the crisis ends, and Russia strongly supports this stand. For his part, Dr. Qadri Jamil stressed that talks with the Russian side were very positive, pointing out that the visit shows that the Syrian government thinks of an action plan for the first day following the end of this crisis, adding that this reflects the confidence of the Syrian leadership and people that they will overcome the crisis.
Saudi forces continue oppressing demonstrators who took to the streets in the eastern region of Al-Qatif, calling for social justice. Al-Qatif and Al-Awamiya areas were the scenes of the attack of the Saudi troops by firing bullets and launching a campaign of arrests which resulted in injuring many. Furthermore, the Saudi forces have warned residents and activists in the eastern region to remain at their homes, taking further measures, sending additional military units to different parts and villages in the eastern areas. But all these measures did not stop citizens from taking to the streets, shouting against Saud family and calling for toppling it, and demanding the release of all prisoners. With this, we conclude our news bulletin for today. For more news and information